Donald Trump says that Iran is standing down from military conflict. Is it? And if not, what happens next with the U.S.-Iranian crisis? Expert analysis on this edition of Politicking. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King. On Wednesday, Donald Trump suggested that Iran is standing down from further military action against the United States. Has Iran taken a so-called off-ramp in the escalating crisis with America? And what happens next to the current tensions between the United States and Tehran? For analysis, we turn to a couple of experts. They are Barbara Slavin, director of the Atlantic Council's Future of Iran Initiative and author of Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies, Iran, the United States, and the Twisted Path to Confrontation. She is in Washington. And in Miami, Michael Szanto, foreign policy expert and especially expert in the Middle East. Okay, Barbara, how do you see it? Do you agree with the president that Iran is standing down?
No, not at all. In fact, there have just been some more rockets fired into the green zone in Baghdad. No, I think this phase perhaps is over, their explicit retaliation for the assassination of their senior national security official, Qasem Soleimani. But this tension will continue as long as the United States and Iran are not negotiating, are not sitting down and talking about peace. So it's far from over.
Do you see them coming to the table, Barbara?
It's very hard for me to envision right now unless Donald Trump is prepared to offer Iran some incentives, some economic incentives. As you know, the Trump administration has put into place a policy of what it calls maximum pressure, which entails an oil embargo, an effort to prevent Iran from exporting any oil. There have been efforts that have been made. French President Emmanuel Macron has made these efforts, but they require the United States to offer Iran some sanctions relief. In return, Iran would return to compliance with the nuclear deal that Trump withdrew from back in 2018.
Michael, what's your read?
I'm more optimistic. The U.S. military strength in the Persian Gulf is rather overwhelming. So Iran has to avoid a military confrontation that's direct head-on with the U.S. military. And I think they're scared because, the targeting of a general makes them more afraid that even though, it starts to become less obvious military targets, they feel jeopardized. And even the regime, they feel jeopardized. Look what happened to Milosevic in 1999. I think sanctions relief at some point as part of a negotiated deal makes sense. But I'm not sure that the Iranians really want to push military options against the world's most powerful military at this point in time.
Barbara, is there a different point of view from the Iranians? In other words, I guess you stand for somebody sitting down together. Why don't we do that more often?
It's a very good question. Look, Trump could have taken the Obama-era nuclear deal and he could have improved it. He could have asked the Iranians for talks on other issues. There was a channel established in that deal for high-level U.S.-Iran engagement. But when he walked out of the deal, he gave up that channel. And now he's talking about NATO and others. I mean, there was no need for this except that he wanted to get rid of Obama's signature foreign policy achievement and please his donors to his political campaign. From a strategic point of view, it was very foolish. Let's look at the consequences. Iran is walking out of the nuclear deal. Our allies throughout the region and in Europe are very upset by this escalation. The U.S. will probably have to leave Iraq, which means that ISIS will grow stronger again and can threaten us in our homeland and threaten the Europeans. And the civil society movements that we've seen in places like Iraq and Iran are being pushed deep underground now. They know that they have no chance if they come out and protest their own governments. They're going to be ruthlessly repressed. So this is a loss. This is not a win.
Michael, do you have to agree with part of that?
Well, I mean, I do partly agree with this. I mean, with the Trump administration generally, we've seen unprecedented chaos. We see this in a lot of vacancies throughout the administration in defense and state departments, et cetera, national security. So it's not a very thoughtful approach. I think that the deal that President Obama made was weaker than it should have been. He agreed to it too fast. But I think that the critics of the deal sometimes oversold its flaws, and that there became a constituency in the United States who mistakenly thought that President Obama gave Iran nuclear weapons and all kinds of terrible things. So the deal got vilified excessively. And I don't think that President Trump, in fact, has a thoughtful policy ever, unfortunately. But I also have to look at that, there's a lot of bad actors within the Iranian government. They remained a danger. The deal had flaws. And that there are other issues other than just an active nuclear weapons program. There's ballistic missiles, which may be nuclear capable, support of terrorism. And I have to also add, if this government is actually toppled, and we never know when that might happen, it's a bad government, it's a repressive government, that would be an excellent thing. And I think everyone has to be careful. President Trump also has legitimate flaws. But if we keep saying the sky is ending in the Persian Gulf, and if, God willing, we see a new government in Iran that's better, then we end up looking stupid. Because I think there is a lot to criticize with the Trump administration, legitimately. And I think there's an element of recklessness in how things are executed.
Barbara, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini has vowed to force the United States troops from the region. You think he will succeed?
No, I don't think he'll succeed in forcing U.S. troops from the region. But he will, I think, succeed in forcing U.S. troops from Iraq and probably Syria. The Iraqi parliament has voted to expel the Americans. I think as long as the tension exists between the U.S. and Iran, puts Iraq in an impossible position. And if I may comment on something Michael said, he said it would be great if the Iranian government fell. Well, that depends on what comes after. I mean, if all we have is another failed state in the Middle East, this time a state of 80 million people, 3 times the size of Iraq, that is not going to be an improvement on what we already have now. The problem with the Trump administration is that we don't know what the goal of their policies are. Is it regime change? Is it a New Deal? Is it a photo op between President Trump and the president of Iran? We simply do not know. And there's an old line, from Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Michael, do you partially agree at least with that? Well, how would
I
they
mean,
know where we're going?
I mean, nobody knows where the Trump administration's going. I would be one of the first to admit this. But I think that the argument that we can't afford another failed state in Iran as justification to accept a dictatorship that's repressive, that is murderous, that is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism since about 1979 or shortly after the revolution, it's kind of a cop-out. We shouldn't be afraid of freedom movements in the Middle East, even though there are costs.
Yeah, can I just say that everything Trump has done has made regime change for the better in Iran less likely. As I mentioned, the civil society protests that we saw in Iran, instead of that, we're seeing people out on the street mourning Qasem Soleimani. And the government is rallying people around the threat of war from the United States. So if your desire is for a better government in Iran, we're going about it entirely the wrong way.
Is there a Western ally, Michael, who might help? Can Saudi Arabia or Jordan step in?
I mean, our traditional allies, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, France, United Kingdom, Germany, generally NATO members, can only help us in this regard. I know sometimes we've had some conflicts, but I think they're very important. Jordan and Saudi Arabia are very important for supporting U.S. interests in the region and stability. And, that's why we've been allies with them for so many decades. But we do have, of course, an Arab-Persian conflict, a Shiite-Sunni conflict. So there are some sectarian issues that we don't actually want to inflame here. But I think that in order to contain Iran, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, including United Arab Emirates, are very important. And that helps, I think, containing a country that could actually lash out as a way to deal with domestic discontent that's where one of the places that our allies in the region are very, very important.
Barbara, I've been asking this question, it feels like generations. I've never gotten a good answer. Why don't people get along?
You know, we had a shot at it with Obama. We weren't friends with Iran, but we weren't enemies for the first time in 40 years. And that's what President Trump threw away, that possibility of détente, that possibility of increased people-to-people connections, more Iranians coming here, more Americans going there, a better life for the Iranian people. As long as we have this adversarial relationship, nobody wins. But you know, the people of Iran are the biggest losers, and it's really a shame. It's a lovely country. I've been there 9 times, has wonderful cultural artifacts, which our president has threatened to destroy. And this country deserves better, and we would benefit from a relationship with the most important country in that part of the world. We have more in common with Iranians, frankly, than we do with many Saudis.
What about Trump calling for the Western allies to call on NATO to play a bigger part, Michael?
That's definitely important. You know, our allies, particularly France, United Kingdom, in some cases Germany, have played, Denmark played major roles in helping us in military operations in that region. I disagree with some of the things that Barbara just said, by the way. I think we have to be strong against this major state sponsor of terrorism. It calls us the Great Satan. They chant death to America. So, I mean, we can't be naive about it. A lot of the people were with us. Some of the moves by Trump may have backfired to a certain extent. I believe in a very, very short-term basis. I don't really see any evidence yet of any significant lasting damage. I mean, frankly, the president's operation took out a major bad terrorist who is responsible for the deaths of many Americans and represents everything that the American-Iranian conflict has been about since the Islamic Revolution, which is basically to fight American influence in the region. And I don't think that we should mourn that we took out this particular bad actor. He represents the worst of this Iranian government, but I don't think that we've really lost an opportunity of detente. And I think if we act too weak with this terrorist government, things will move in another bad direction, that we give them free rein to commit terrorism throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. We can't have that either.
We'll ask our guests where they think all of this is going when politicking continues after the break.
Aeroflot, Russian Airlines.
In a world of fake partisan news, lies, and conspiracy,
it's time to wake up, to dig deeper, to hit the stories that mainstream media refuses to tell. More than ever, we need to be smarter. We need to stop slamming the door on the facts and shouting past each other. It's time for critical thinking. It's time to fight for the middle, for the truth. The time is now for watching closer, for watching the Hawks.
Aeroflot, Russian Airlines.
Welcome back to Politicking. Continue the conversation with our panel. Barbara Slavin, director of the Atlantic Council's Future of Iran Initiative. She's in Washington. And in Miami, Michael Szanto, foreign policy and Middle East expert. Okay, Barbara, where's it all going?
Oh, Larry, I just hope we don't get ourselves into a full-scale war with Iran. I hope both sides can somehow step back from the brink. I would like to see us go back into negotiations with Iran. I would like to see an end to the travel ban that makes it so hard for Iranians to come to this country. We are hurting our own interests by not having a normal, or at least a somewhat respectful relationship with this very ancient and important country.
Michael, we have a travel ban because they're a terrorist state, right?
Well, the travel ban I can't really defend because it seemed to evolve from what appeared to be a racist campaign promise to ban Muslims. So I can't defend that travel ban. Yes, there are legitimate security issues. Iran is a major sponsor of terrorism. We've heard this from every administration, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Obama. It's a very serious issue. And in fact, while I have an enormous respect for Barbara's experience, I'm actually surprised that she hasn't addressed that at all, because she's talked about ancient Persian society, but I'm actually surprised she hasn't even addressed their support of Hamas or Hezbollah, which I think are very serious issues, and it would be a major break with American tradition and foreign policy for 30 years to ignore the fact that Iran is a huge sponsor of terrorism.
Barbara, it's your ball.
Can I answer?
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm not ignoring that at all. Of course, Iran doesn't think they're terrorists. These are Iran's partners in the region. No, I'm not ignoring that at all. But I think that if the United States wants to deal with these issues, it has to be able to sit down and talk to Iran. And there have been opportunities to discuss these issues that were squandered, particularly by the George W. Bush administration after 9/11. And I write about them at length in my book. So, there are always two sides to a story. And I think to understand Iran would help us to put together some proper policies that might make the situation better for everyone.
We're dealing with a government that denies the Holocaust, that says that it wants to wipe out. Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. No,
yes,
there are
it does.
individuals. No, there are individuals within Iran who try to minimize the Holocaust, but the vast majority of Iranians do not. And in fact, there are still 10,000 Jews living in Iran. Jews have lived in Iran for 5,000 years. Iranians, I have discovered in my visits there, are anti-Semitic. They don't like Arabs. They don't have, however, feelings of hostility toward Jews. So I'm sorry, obviously you've never been to the country. If you had, you might have a different impression.
No, I don't know if you misheard what I said. Maybe you just misheard. I said the government. It is very well documented. I'm aware
elements of the government, but not all of the government. And
what
you
part
may
of the
remember
government has what part of the government has ever refuted Holocaust denial? These are government conferences.
President Hassan Rouhani, as I recall, wished a happy Rosh Hashanah to Jews everywhere upon taking office in 2013.
You could find examples of the Nazis doing the same thing. The fact of
no,
the matter is
you're thinking of the previous president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was a Holocaust denier, but not many people within the government.
It wasn't just him. You're actually.
I think we're going to have both of you back. This is very lively.
To be continued.
Okay,
Michael,
sounds good.
Thanks for your time today.
You're very welcome.
While tensions with Iran are happening, the impeachment battle continues on the D.C. war front. Will the Iran crisis have an impeachment impact? And when can the Senate expect to begin the trial of Donald J. Trump? For this, we talk with Guy Lewis, former United States Attorney who joins us from Miami. Well, Guy, with the fallout from the United States killing of Soleimani, Tehran's retaliation, can we go on with the impeachment process now?
Boy, I think, Larry, that it certainly seems to be a huge distraction in terms of trying to get this thing geared up. It has to be, it has to be the last thing on the minds of the senators up in D.C. right now.
Are you surprised at it all?
I am a little bit surprised because, frankly, I thought that the articles of impeachment, the two that were passed, about 22, 23 days ago, would already be over in the Senate, and they would be underway by this time, to be perfectly honest.
Well, has it been the Speaker of the House who's played it better, or the President?
Boy, that's a good question, Larry. I think that they're basically at this three-way impasse where you've got Mitch McConnell, who's standing firm, saying, look, send them over or we're not starting. You've got Pelosi saying, hey, I want to dictate the terms of the trial before I send anything over. And almost the president sitting on the sidelines kind of watching as a spectator.
Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think eventually Pelosi's got to send something over. I mean, how much longer can she wait? Can she hold them until, oh, I don't know, the summer, the fall, when the election's going on? I know that, Larry, look, when I was trying cases as a prosecutor, you couldn't sit on an indictment. You returned the charges, you had to send them over to a judge for the jury to pick up and start trying, or you got your case thrown out of court.
Yeah, but when you were a prosecutor, you knew who the defense was, right? And you knew when it was supposed to start at a certain date. And if you had a certain date and the defense had information that they won't give to you, what do?
Boy, oh boy, that's right. That's a great point. And it sort of goes to this point that I've thought about a lot, is that politics and prosecution don't mix, do they? I mean, this is political. That's what this is. It's political. Very little about the law is really involved in this process. And it's basically, unlike the Clinton administration, the Clinton impeachment, and even the Andrew Johnson impeachment. You look at, those are the only two for the president. Nixon never got around to it. But even when you look at Johnson and Clinton, there was bipartisan movement on both of those impeachments. Boy, we just don't have that here.
No, you're right. And whose fault is it? Do you lay a lot at the feet of McConnell?
You know what? I think there's plenty of blame to go around on this one, both in the House and in the Senate. I sit back and I kind of watch this and I said, you know, why don't these guys and ladies get back to the work of the people? I mean, that's what we sent them up there for, not to sit there and point fingers and throw lob bombs back and forth.
Well, Bolton says he's willing to testify if subpoenaed. Do you think he will testify?
I'd say, if I'm betting right now, Larry, I'm betting he does not testify. Not that I don't think he might have some information, but it seems like that the senators really, with the exception of maybe one or two, don't really want to hear a lot of extra testimony other than what's occurred in the House. Again, you look at the Clinton impeachment, very different. They didn't even, the House Judiciary Committee under Clinton didn't even conduct an investigation, or they were relying solely and exclusively, Larry, on the Ken Starr report, something that, again, didn't happen here.
Okay, McConnell continues his plan. We don't know where it's going with Bolton. You don't think Bolton will testify? Where is it all going, do you think?
So I think
Finally,
if I'm a betting man, so here's what I'd bet on, that eventually Pelosi's got to send these two articles of impeachment over to the Senate. They're then going to take up the case, and they're going to do something very interesting. I went back and looked at the Clinton case closely. In that case, Robert Byrd, who was with the Democrats, of course, from West Virginia, moved to dismiss the case as they started their initial arguments. Now, because the Republicans held the majority, that motion was denied. In this case, I'll bet you a dime to a dollar that one of the Republicans moves to dismiss the case. They put it up for a vote, it's granted, and this case is out the door.
And John Bolton's writing a book, and we'll learn more what he thinks when that comes out.
That's right. He'll make a couple $1 million, and we'll get to know eventually. It's interesting with Bolton, Larry, because really I look at that and kind of scratch my head. If he had something, if he had something, I think we'd probably already know if it was something that was earth-shattering.
Last time you were on Politicking, you said that if you were representing the president, you'd make a motion to dismiss and seek a quick vote to get things over with. Is that still your position?
I think that's where we're going. I think that as soon as this thing gets teed up in the Senate, you're going to see Lindsey Graham move to dismiss this case, and by a majority, which is all they need, Larry, a majority, motion's going to carry, and this case is dismissed.
But the public, all polls indicate, wants John Bolton to testify before the Senate because it's juicy and it would add interest to it, and it's probably important, don't you think?
Well, you make a good point. And if they decide, if the senators decide, hey, we got to hear from Bolton, I don't think it's going to be this sort of drama moment where they open the back of the Senate chambers and he walks in and he testifies. Again, let's look at Clinton. They had a couple witnesses who testified. They took a break. The senators took a break, sent them out, took some depositions, and then brought in and read excerpts. So it was a lot different than what we might expect if we were watching Perry Mason.
The consensus is that even if Bolton testifies, Trump will be acquitted. Do you agree?
I do, Larry. I think acquittal is coming down the pike.
Now, Bolton refused to cooperate with the House at first, and he said he should be subpoenaed. Now he said he will answer the subpoena. Could Bolton come forward on his own? Could he agree to a sit-down interview somewhere?
He could. In fact, he could write a synopsis of his testimony right now and send it over to Mitch McConnell or to anybody, frankly. Now, whether that testimony could be used is still, I think, Larry, subject to executive privilege, which is an established privilege that the Supreme Court recognized in the Nixon case.
Guy, thanks so much. I always love talking to you. Let's do it more often.
Let's do it, Larry. Good to see you, sir.
Guy Lewis, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Politicking. Remember, you can join the conversation on my Facebook page or tweet me at King's Things. And don't forget to use the Politicking hashtag. And that's all for this edition of Politicking.
Aeroflot, Russian Airlines.
In a world of fake partisan news, lies, and conspiracy,
It's time to wake up, to dig deeper, to hit the stories that mainstream media refuses to tell. More than ever, we need to be smarter. We need to stop slamming the door on the facts and shouting past each other. It's time for critical thinking. It's time to fight for the middle, for the truth. The time is now for watching closer, for watching the Hawks.
Aeroflot, Russian Airlines.